We are going to continue where we left off, and so we have this moment with the cloak where it's handed off, or it's offered at least, to Elisha, and we pick up in 1 Kings chapter 19 to see what happens. So if you're following along, it's 1 Kings 19 to 21. He departed from there, that's Elijah, and found Elisha, the son of Shaphat, who was plowing with 12 yoke of oxen in front of him, and he was with the 12th. Elijah passed by him and cast his cloak upon him. And we're in the ancient Near East, where a symbol is a sermon, and we're trying to connect that sermon with the bigger story in the universe, how it relates to Christ and how it relates to us. And so this is what happened. And he left the oxen, Elisha did, and ran after Elijah and said, "Let me kiss my father and mother, and then I will follow you." And he said to him, "Go back again, for what have I done to you?" And he returned from following him and took the yoke of oxen and sacrificed them and boiled their flesh with the yokes of the oxen and gave it to the people, and they ate. Then he arose and went after Elijah and assisted him. So Elijah walks by, he throws the cloak over him. Elisha knows what this means. This is a huge deal. There's this implicit agreement in there. And he says, "All right, I've been given the cloak. Let me go home for a second. There's something I need to do." And then we have this kind of strange answer, "Go back again, for what have I done to you?" That's just a Hebrew expression that means, "Don't let me stand in your way." So this wasn't Elisha saying, "Oh, I want to, go home and do a bunch of stuff that's going to take a long time." He just was saying, "I'm going to clear up a few things before I come with you." And Elijah says, "Go for it. That's fine." And so he goes home and he says goodbye to his family, and then he does something kind of strange. He takes his oxen, the ones he was plowing with, which would have been very valuable, and he slaughters them. And then he takes the yokes of the oxen, which probably would have been made out of wood, and he cuts them up and makes a bonfire out of them. And then he boils the meat, and I just picture a big pot hanging over the fire like a big festival in the village. He boils the meat over the fire to make ox sandwiches for all of his friends and the family and the town. And when he's done with this feast, he gets up and goes with Elijah and starts assisting him. So like, serving him? Yeah. So when he got this cloak, he jumped straight into serving. And it's actually like he gets a new boss. Before he was in charge of his own time and life and energy, and now he's not. And in fact, this sentence, "Then he went with Elijah as his assistant," marks a 10-year gap where we hear nothing about Elisha. And actually, when we finish this segment, we're going to have to jump forward to 2 Kings chapter 2, because there's a whole lot of stuff that happens in this 10 years, undoubtedly, but we know nothing about it except the basic idea of what he's doing for 10 years. Following Elijah around, listening to him, learning from him, serving him. And there's this school of prophets at Bethel and Jericho, and it kind of seems like Elijah was actually a prophet trainer. So he had a Bible school. It was Capernwray in Bethel. And he's got some people he's training, kind of like a disciple. Basically, Elisha becomes a disciple. And the structure of discipleship that we see in the New Testament wasn't so formalized in that time and in that way. But basically, that is exactly what he's doing. So he's following around, learning from him, and serving, obeying, just doing whatever he says. And as a confirmation of the kind of stuff that he's having to do, which sounds awesome, we read in a little bit later in 2 Kings 3 that Elisha is referred to as the one who poured water on the hands of Elijah. So this is our picture of what life with Elisha is like. Elisha's following Elijah around. What are we doing today? Oh, okay. And then Elijah's like, hands. And so Elisha, gets some water, pours the water on his hands, helping with hand washing. This is how he's known. Who is that guy again? Oh, yeah. He was the guy doing menial, lowly, boring, degrading tasks of humble service for 10 years. Wait. I thought if you take the cloak, you get all this great stuff. Well, accepting the cloak, with all of its benefits, did cost him something. It cost him his life. And this is the other part of the implied agreement in receiving a cloak. If you take it, your life isn't your own anymore. And actually, we know quite a bit about what discipleship was like in its more refined sense, just through considering the history of rabbis and disciples in Jesus' day. But we also saw it in the life of Jesus' disciples, what it meant that they were called to be his disciple. That was a very high honor to be a disciple of Jesus. But the disciples' calling was not just a call to relationship, it was a call to a total life change. And the thing is I always thought of discipleship as like getting to know, well, let's be in relationship. But when Jesus called, for instance, Simon and Andrew, at the time he walks up and calls them, he had had a relationship with them for a year. So he wasn't calling them into relationship, he was calling them to start a new job. To abandon what they were doing as the main thing and devote themselves to him and his work. And so they were saying yes to a total life change, and this meant some things practically for them, and this also that we also see reflected in the life of Elijah and Elisha. But for Jesus' disciples, it meant they went from providing for themselves to depending on Jesus to provide for them, which sounds very nice until you're wrestling with living in dependence. Not always easy. For them, it meant they went from a life where they more or less knew what every day was going to hold to a life of uncertainty and surprises. The disciples are walking around saying, okay, Jesus, what are we doing today? Well, we're walking over here. Well, we're doing this. Look at the woman who's putting the money in. It meant for them, they went from making all their own decisions to being dependent on Jesus to lead and make the decisions. And it meant they went from using their gifts and talents for themselves and their own benefit to a life where they were using them for the kingdom of God. That was discipleship for Jesus' disciples, and that is basically what Elisha was doing with Elijah. He arose and went after Elijah and assisted him. That is a very significant sentence. And in the same way that we see it in the Old Testament, Elijah following Elisha, and we see the disciples of Christ following Jesus, I think it applies to us now as well, because if we accept Christ, and by the way, I'll have these slides available for download if you want them, if you don't get it quick enough. I'll make a PDF. But if we accept Christ and we say yes to receiving this mantle, we are not just saying yes to receiving his benefits. We're saying yes to accepting his authority. And this is the case with the receiving of the cloak, the mantle. He received benefits, but he also submitted to a new authority. And the cost was his life, a new boss, and giving up authority and rights to him. If I'm honest, this sentence sounds very nice to me in theory. But when I read something like that, I have a question which bubbles up in my life over and over and over again. This did not just bubble up when I received Christ. It didn't bubble up just a couple years after. It keeps bubbling up, and I have this bubble up. This question bubbles up even now. And here's the question. Is it worth it? Is it worth it? And maybe you've asked those questions too, because you're walking with Christ, or you want to walk with Christ, and you're looking at people who don't, and their life is fantastic. And maybe like me, you've experienced what it is to see how your friends who reject Christ have a fantastic life. They do what they want. Nothing goes wrong. They put whatever they want in their bodies. They sleep with whoever they want to. And they are very financially successful. And this little thing that I always heard growing up, in Sunday school, oh, if you follow Christ, life is going to be great. If you don't, it'll be terrible, just terrible. Your life will be terrible. Well, that sounded very good and terrified me as a kid until I grew up and saw this is not happening. I have lots of friends whose lives are not terrible. Let's just get that on the table. Their lives are not terrible, and they're not walking with Christ. So is it worth it for me? If you want to read an incredible prayer journal entry, you can read Psalm 73, and that's the psalmist Asaph, and he writes that. He says, you know what happens to wicked people? Everything goes great for them, and then they get rich. And then he says, and here's what happens to me. I try and obey God, and my life is miserable. What the heck? And if you've wrestled with that, maybe you've wrestled with this question, is it worth it? Is it really worth it to walk with Christ? And maybe you're thinking it's not worth it. If you think it's not worth it to walk with Christ, believe me when I tell you, I understand. I've been there. And here we have a picture that relates to this wrestling that we sometimes do. Because Elisha now has a new authority and a new call to service, and he goes home to do this strange thing. He burns up the stuff of his past and gives it to somebody else for lunch. It's the ultimate sign of commitment to go forward, burning bridges, to make an ox sandwich. This is a pretty concrete symbol for himself and for everybody else. You know what? When I accepted that cloak, I'm committing to the life-changing challenge and the life-changing adventure that comes with accepting it. And this is a one-way calling to follow a new boss. And today, in this moment, I see it's worth it. And so I'm going to do something concrete to burn that into me. It is worth it. By the way, following Christ does not have to be bad and hard. I have experienced all kinds of terrible and hard and bad things, but I also have to tell you, other elements of my life include climbing mountains, making music with good friends, traveling all over the world, having a blast with my family and kids, living in a spectacularly beautiful place, having every need provided. So it doesn't always have to be bad. In fact, very often, my life is it's fantastic. But even in the midst of that, I still have these times where the questions come, is it worth it? And so, because Elisha is at this point where he knows this is what's coming, and he knows, you know what, sometimes it's going to be hard, sometimes it's not going to be fun, but today I see clearly. There may be tears, there may be opposition, there may be stress, but I am not going to leave room to dream about returning to my old life, because now my old life is a sandwich. This is my old life. And Danny made this sandwich. It's pretty epic. I love it. I smiled as soon as I saw it. And I'm wondering if there's anybody in this room who is a little bit hungry. Is there anybody hungry? You don't have to eat the whole thing, but is there anybody? Yeah, come on up. If you're hungry and you're willing to come on up, yeah, come on up. You're hungry?
Yeah.
Okay. This is pure, except that I have touched the top part with my fingers. But, hang on. Slow down. But, to the best of my knowledge, this is very edible.
Really?
Yeah. And so, what's your name?
Becca.
Becca. I'm going to give you this sandwich. Hang on. I'm going to need it back in a minute. But I'm going to give it to you in the end, finally. But I'm wondering if you could do us a favor and just come a little bit more towards the center of the room so everybody can see you. And if you could begin eating this sandwich. Okay? I just need you to begin eating the sandwich.
Right
and you can just start at the top, you know. Yeah. But hang on. No, stop. Hang on. Stop. What we need you to do is we need you to eat it in really slow motion. Okay? So you're just going to like take a bite and like, okay. And here's what we're going to do. That's your job. Okay. This is our job. Our job is to picture like that this is like one of these commercials. You know the commercials where you take a pill or something and then you have red and then you see the like it's going through the body and then it's just like blue and it's like, oh, I have no back pain anymore, you know? We want to it's like these infographics where you see what's happening in the body. Now what we want to do with you is we want to have you eat this very slowly and we're going to picture what is happening inside Rebecca's body while she's eating it for the digestion. So if you can begin just very slowly, this is what we're doing. We are watching a commercial, and you are not you. You are an infographic. So on your marks, get set, go. Okay, that's too slow. You can actually eat. You can eat something. Okay, here we go. Yeah, okay, good. Perfect. Oh, sorry. All right, everyone. Remember, this is not Becca. This is an infographic. So we are seeing the food. Hang on, you just turn a little bit sideways a little bit. Okay, we're seeing the food is like going in like kind of the esophagus, chewing, mixing with acids and stuff in the mouth. And then as you continue chewing, it's like going down. And then there's like large and small intestine is going through. You can keep eating. It's great. It's awesome. You're an infographic. And it's going through the large and small intestine. And of course, the stomach. And there's all kinds of chemical stuff that's happening there. And then eventually, which one's first, the large or the small intestine? Does anybody know? Small intestine first. So small intestine, then it's large intestine, and then, I'm very sorry. But then eventually, it just comes out here. Thank you very much for this. Yeah, thank you. I'm giving it back to you. I'm going to give it back to you. I promise. As soon as we're done, you get this back. I just need to show it. So, I have selected as the image for this story. Actually, no, you can take it. I'm going to give it to you. This is like too complicated. Don't eat it all at once.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. I've selected for this story an ox sandwich as the picture. But actually, that's not the real picture. Because the real picture is not as nice. It would actually be feces. Right? Because it goes through your body, and it comes out as feces. And what Elisha was doing in this situation is actually literally counting his old life as feces. And I'll bet you, because I've read his life story a little bit, and he experienced some not very nice stuff. I would bet you that there were many times in his life that he said, you know what, it was way easier in my old life. I would like to go back to farming because this stinks. Wouldn't it be great to be my own boss? And this was a reminder, stop. When you accepted that cloak, you had a moment of clarity, and you made a fire, and you cooked a farming sandwiches. You burned your bridges. Now look forward. And maybe there's one person in this room who's like me, and sometimes you're thinking, I'm not sure it's worth it. I'm not sure in the big sense, but in this area of my life, I'm not sure it's worth it to walk with Jesus. Maybe there's an area where we want the benefits of Christ, but we don't want his authority. Or maybe you, like me, frequently come to a point where there's something in your past that you know you're called to leave behind, but going back to it looks pretty attractive. And if that's the case, I encourage us, just for a minute, to pause and consider what some of those things are. Consider what some of those things are, and maybe write them down. The top one or two things that comes to your mind, where I want his benefits in the big sense, but I don't want his authority in my life in this area. Or, there's something in my past that always is a temptation for me to return to because it's attractive. Let's take 30 seconds just to consider, and if something comes to mind, write it down. We'll eventually come back to it. Anyone willing to shout something out? It's okay if not. These are also very personal. The truth is, for us, it's also a trade-off in some way, shape, or form. Because until Jesus returns, the challenges will come. They will. And sometimes the first thought in our mind is, man, it was nicer when I didn't have to deal with this. It sure was nicer when I just did whatever the heck I wanted and didn't give any thought to it. Life was so much simpler. Wouldn't it be great if I went back to farming? Or my old life? Whatever it was that I know that I was called out of? And the answer of history in the larger arc is no. It wouldn't be better. Because there is a bigger story. There is a bigger reality at play here. And the daily decisions that I make must be made in the light of this bigger reality. And yes, we live in a time where we see much of evil. And we also see much of things that are against what God has said, and some of it looks good. Yes, some of it works out. But other parts of this world are a mess. And if we called that the kingdom of the world, just to describe the world in all of its mess, in all of its rejection of God, some stuff works. But there's also cancer, and there's also disloyalty, and there's also pain, and there's also people who don't have clean water, and there's also all kinds of cheating and lying, and boyfriends cheating on girlfriends, and girlfriends cheating on boyfriends, and divorce and pain and upheaval. The kingdom of the world also is this incredible mess. And it sometimes is tempting, if this were all there was, to try and make the best out of grabbing stuff from the kingdom of the world to try and make my life work and try and make it feel better. But this is not all there is. Because Jesus came and said, I am here to announce a new kingdom. It is the kingdom of heaven. And in my kingdom, everything is as it is supposed to be. There is no cheating, stealing, lying, people not having clean water. It doesn't pay to do this stupid stuff. It doesn't pay to be selfish. There is no more cancer, and there is no more paralysis, and none of this stuff. My kingdom is the kingdom where everything is as it's supposed to be. And here's the thing, he said, I am going to come back again. And when I come back, I am going to get rid of the kingdom of the world, and the only thing that will remain is my kingdom where everything is as it's supposed to be. And so, in the meantime, you live here. And we see some beautiful things in this time where the kingdom of heaven is made visible to us. We see people get healed. We see people who should hate each other reconciling. We see dads take their sons who can't walk and do triathlons with them on YouTube. We see things that touch our heart. We see a student at Bodenseehof from Russia and a student from Bodenseehof from Ukraine who should hate each other, run to each other, embrace each other, and sob and live as best friends. That's the kingdom of heaven. We see little bits of it. But we also see tons of the garbage of the kingdom of the world. And this is an invitation to live in light of the bigger story. Because there is a bigger story, and to live in light of the kingdom. Wouldn't it be great if I went back to my old life? No! It wouldn't be great if I went back to my old life. Because Jesus is better. And Jesus is coming back, and the gospel is true, and belonging to him is so much better, whether I see it today or not, that it's worth it to make an ox sandwich out of anything he's leading me away from. Because in comparison with him and what he offers us and his forgiveness and his freedom and the new kingdom and the new earth, all that the world has to offer me is just feces. And this is picture number 2. And the symbol is a sermon. And I've chosen the symbol of ox sandwich because it's nicer. But what does this symbol teach us? Jesus is better. Jesus is better. Jesus is better. Better than what? Who cares? Doesn't matter. Some days I see it. Some days I don't. And of course, using feces as our picture, a symbol wouldn't be very nice, but actually it's a better comparison because Paul said this in Philippians 3:8. He said, "Indeed, I count everything as loss because of the surpassing worth of knowing Christ Jesus my Lord. For his sake, I have suffered the loss of all things and count them as rubbish in order that I may gain Christ." And that was very nicely translated, but the Greek is skubulon, which means dung. I have counted this all as dung. You know, I find it pretty interesting and challenging that after this incredible calling, being called to lead his nation as a prophet, the first step is listening and serving for 10 years. And during this 10 years, what exciting stuff is happening? Nothing. Pouring hands on the boss, pouring water on the hands of the boss. And when I think about, leadership, sometimes the tendency is to emphasize the thing like the position or the power, but those things are given, not developed. Character is another matter, and character is developed over a long period of time, and there are no shortcuts. 10 years, nothing seems to be happening. 10 years. I've noticed that I have a warped perspective about time. and I know this because as insane as this is, how many of you use Amazon Prime? Yeah, okay. How many of you, if you're buying something, you like scorn anything that does not have the Prime logo next to it because you know it's going to take more than 24 hours? Right? You're just like, not getting that, you know, ridiculous. It's going to be delivered to my door in 3 days? What insane person would do that, you know? And everything is fast, right? Everything is fast. And so it's very difficult for me to accept a period of time in my walk with the Lord in faith where nothing is happening. It's very difficult. Some of you have seen an interview with a particular comedian where he said, you know, it's amazing how much we complain about amazing things. And how we'll say, you know, I'm complaining about my flight because it didn't board for 20 minutes, and then they made us sit out on the runway for 40 minutes, and it was hell on earth. And he said, oh, really? What happened next? Did you fly through the air like a bird, you know? Did you take part in the miracle of human flight? You're sitting in a chair in the sky. It's amazing. You go from New York to California in just a few hours. It used to take months, and people would die on the way, and babies would be born, and you'd arrive with a completely different group of people. And I watched this little video clip, and I'm laughing, but I also said, that's me. And I forget that significant stuff takes time. It would be very easy to skip over this section of 10 years and just go, next verse, about Elisha. But it was 10 years. Maturing, growing, figuring stuff out takes time. Learning wisdom, humility, healing takes time. Building something takes time. Developing a relationship takes time. And I forget this. And by the way, as we're reading in the Old Testament, it can be very confusing. It can trick us a little bit. I mean, listen to this. You know, I'm like, God, when are you going to do something in my life? Because I just read the old Bible, and God's doing stuff in people's lives, isn't he? So when are you going to do something in mine? And I read verses like this in Genesis 4. It's great. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bore Enoch. When he built a city, he called the name of the city after the name of his son, Enoch. So this is typical Old Testament. In one Bible verse, he gets his wife pregnant, they have a child, and he builds a city. But that actually takes a little bit of time. Or even more odd, when Adam had lived 130 years, he fathered a son in his own likeness, after his image, named him Seth. The days of Adam after he fathered Seth were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Oh, okay, yeah. And the Bible's full of this. You just skip from one thing to the next. And so sometimes I'm like, living life with God, I'm going, why aren't you doing something? Why haven't you done this? And I was recently having a conversation with somebody who was saying, this is what God's doing in my life. And I'm thinking, I haven't experienced that. What the heck? Why isn't this sorted out? It's like, well, Steve, you know, the last 3 months, if you live an average lifespan, the last 3 months of your life has been 0.003 of your expected lifespan. So if nothing happened in the last 3 months, so what? Craig Groeschel is this guy who started Life Church TV. Some of you know it. And I heard him say this. He said, our generation, I'm just including myself in that. Our generation, you're in my generation, our generation massively overestimates what we can do in the short run, in the short term. But we massively underestimate what God can do through us in a lifetime of faithful service. One foot after the other going forward. And I absolutely see myself in that. I massively overestimate what God is going to do with me in the short term. 3 months, 6 months, Bible school, 1 year, whatever. I massively overestimate what he's going to do in a year. But I also underestimate what God tends to do in this lifetime of faithfully plodding forward with him, also when we're not seeing anything happen. And my passion in things of faith is often like lighting hay on fire, just like, ah! Oh, nothing. Well, I guess that didn't work out. But maybe I just need to settle in for some slow perseverance. A long obedience in the same direction. Nietzsche said it, Eugene Peterson used it as a title for a book. A long obedience in the same direction. Keep going on. And you know what? I want answers. And I want experiences. And I want stuff figured out. And I want healing and freedom in life. And maybe you do too. But maybe it's going to be like climbing a mountain. A time where you're not seeing and experiencing much. Or you're training for a long race. And it's just, do it. And maybe your life with Christ will have a 10-year period, or 1, or 2, or whatever, where it's just like, definitely waking up and brushing my teeth and going to work and coming home. And community, not that exciting, but we're doing it. And maybe time with God, not much happening, but we're doing it. And bed. And wake up. And maybe there's going to be a segment of life that's like that. And what I'm learning is that God's work in a person and in his kingdom, it's often compared to something like a seed or a tree. God's work is like, the pictures are like vines, trees, mustard seeds, fruit, agriculture stuff that takes time. It's not an SMS. And the work of God in our life is probably, if I had to guess, and this is why I don't skip over 10 years, but we take a minute on it, I would guess that the work of God in your life and my life is going to be more like a slow-growing oak tree than an SMS. And it could be that some of you, are disappointed. Boy, I understand that so much. I so understand being disappointed with God, with faith, with his work in me. I so get that. Because I work at a Bible school. And let me tell you, we have these sharing services, and have people get up at sharing services, and they're like, God is doing this in my life. And I'm like, yes, good. Not in mine. And God spoke to me, and he did this. And I'm going, and it's even worse when you're theoretically responsible for the Bible school, because you're like, I'm not having that experience. But really what's happening when one person after the next comes up, I mean, it's not all positive things, but really what that is it's a highlight reel, isn't it? It's a Facebook, feed. It's an Instagram feed. It's newer. It's only snapshots of the best moments. And the students at Bodensehof, I mean, we have a great time. They make videos that are just mind-blowing. I mean, there's one on our webpage under the Bible school section that students made, and you watch it, and it's just like, this is awesome, It's a highlight reel. It's like, boom, this happens, this, skiing, climbing, Bible, fellowship, love, fantastic. And you're like, this is Bible school. And then you come, and it's like, well, nobody posted a picture of the carpeting of the lecture hall on Instagram, but that's what I'm staring at for the last 5 hours, That's what I look at 342 hours of second semester. It's a highlight reel, not reality. What about 7 weeks of fog and depression and projects? Post that. But that's life. And the word for me at this time is, Jesus is still trustworthy. And even if it doesn't look like he's doing something, he is doing something because he's developing character. And if I take a step with him, it could be that I just signed myself up to wait. And character development takes time, and character is important. And maybe you've noticed there's a lot of failures in leadership. Christians, not Christians, anybody. And a lot of those failures, most of the failures we hear about in both Christian world, secular world, business world, it very often does not have to do with lack of ability or lack of authority. The biggest crash and burns are usually related in some way to lack of character. And we ask ourselves, like when we read different stories I have many times, why did they misallocate funds? Why did they hire prostitutes? Why were they so unethical and ruthless and deceptive and threaten people and do dirty, illegal stuff and send weird text messages to and then cover it up? Why did they do that? Well, character. And it's easy to be deceived by the appeal of gifting and ability, but if there's a 10-year period, if there's a time where it doesn't seem like anything is happening, I promise you, God does not waste his time, and he doesn't waste yours. He will never waste his time, and he will never waste your time. And strong character does not fly out of thin air when you get a calling. Character does not all come at once. It is developed, and it is a process. And I think of the character building in times where we don't see things happening. I think of it in terms of like this crane. And if you have a crane like this, and you were just to extend the top part further and further out, without strengthening the foundation, eventually, it will tip over and crash. And I believe this is true in the life of a person. If a person's gifting runs out further than their character is deep, you'll see the crane tip over. And so, Elisha spends years serving, listening. No highlights. No exciting stuff happened. Just practice. Spiritual failure? God's not doing anything? Nope. Training program. Because what you practice and train now will affect how you live later when it really counts. I once took some friends on a hike in the mountains, and one guy really, really wanted to go on an adventure, and the other guy was a fellow mountain person. And so we decided to do something that would be kind of easy for us, but would still give a little bit of adventure to this other guy. His name was Adam. And we started hiking, and as we got just a little way up off the, from the parking lot, this deep, deep fog descended. The kind that's a total whiteout, where if you hold up your hiking pole in front of you, you don't necessarily hike with hiking poles. I do. If you hold up your hiking pole in front of you, you can't see the end of it because it was so foggy. And we couldn't see anything, and I said, let's just go as quick as we can up this mountain. There's a path, but we're not going to take it. I know exactly where it is. I'd been there many, many times, and so did the other guy. And I said, Adam, we're going to just go straight here. And he said, no, we can't do this. I said, there's no point. Let's just get up there quickly, and maybe it'll clear. Maybe we'll get above the clouds, whatever. So we began heading directly off towards the mountain peak without the path, and we're scrambling over stuff and jumping over stuff, and this guy is getting really upset. He said, you're going to getting us so lost. We can't see anything. I said, we're fine. But after a while, I started thinking, we're not fine, because I had no idea where we were, and I was unwilling to admit this, so I just began praying inwardly. It's like, Lord, you got to get us somewhere because I have no idea where we are in the middle of nowhere, fog, who cares? This could get dangerous. So I'm praying, and finally we emerge out from some bushes onto, praise the Lord, the path. And I was like, see, we're fine, terrible, because I'm so spiritual. And so we hike on the path all the way up, and we get to the top, and we're on this peak, and we couldn't see a thing because of the fog. And I said, boy, I'll tell you, if you could see, it would be so beautiful. There's a lake, and there's cliffs, and it's just magnificent. I began to describe the whole scene, the blue water and the ships on the lake and all these things behind the Kurfürsten. And then we sat down and had lunch, and as we were eating lunch, a very strong wind came and just whoosh, blew all of the clouds away for about 5 minutes. And I said, we can see! And we stood up, and we looked out, and saw not what we described. And we looked across the valley, and across the valley we saw the peak we were supposed to be standing on. And I said, whoops. How in the world do you land on the wrong mountain peak? It's ridiculous. How do you land on the wrong mountain peak? Really easy. One step at a time on the wrong path. That's how you end up on the wrong mountain peak. One step at a time on the wrong path. And so what you practice and train in the fog when you can't see anything, what you practice and train when nothing's happening, this 10 years is very significant because it is affecting where you're going to end up in the future. And yes, if we belong to Christ, He will transform us and He will lead us, but it takes time. And this transformation, this sanctification is very significant and cannot be labeled as spiritual failure. We can't label it as God's not doing anything. We must label it for what it is. 10 years of God working, training us. And maybe you're waiting for something and He's not doing it. Tell Him this afternoon. Maybe you're in 10 years of silence. Nothing's happening. Thank Him for it. Because this time matters. God doesn't waste His time. He doesn't waste yours. And is it worth it? Yes, it is. Jesus, thank You for this reality. We sometimes can't believe it. That it's worth it to be on the road with You. Sometimes we can't believe that it's worth it to submit to Your authority in certain areas of our life. But we know, or we kind of know, by Your Spirit that it is. And so I ask that You would help us to be people who live with confidence in You, taking one step at a time, whether we see You or not, whether we feel You or not, whether it's clear what You're doing or not, that You would give us the strength and confidence by Your Spirit to live, knowing that in the light of the bigger story, it is so worth it. In Your name, Jesus. Amen. Let's have a coffee break.